What do rappers, personal injury lawyers, protesters, teachers, churches all have in common? Well, they could all be subject to a RICO indictment. Today, let's cover two things. First, what is a RICO charge? And two, what is an overall summary of the Young Thug trial going on in Atlanta, Georgia right now? Young Thug is a Grammy award-winning rapper who founded a record label called Young Stoner Life, YSL, but prosecutors allege that YSL is actually or is also a criminal street gang and have charged Young Thug as being the leader of this criminal street gang. Young Thug has been charged under the RICO statute in Georgia. So let's go over the statute briefly. RICO stands for Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. The statute, as originally written, was intended to make it easier for prosecutors to go after the higher ups in gang organizations. For example, the person leading the gang would never get in trouble because that person was the higher up and they were never out on the streets doing the dirty work. So what happened was that the people lower down, the people on the streets doing the dirty work, were getting convicted, but the prosecutors could never catch the higher ups. And so they created the RICO statutes to be able to get everybody in that organization, even if you were not on the streets doing the dirty work. But the issue is that the statute has now been interpreted and it is so expansive, particularly in Georgia, that pretty much anybody can be swept up in a chain of conduct. For example, you might be swept up in a chain of conduct where you don't even know the other individuals that you are charged to be in a criminal enterprise with. You don't even have to know those people. Under the RICO statute, prosecutors can bring charges against any criminal enterprise, but the word enterprise has been used to its outer limits. It's doing the heavy lifting there because what prosecutors have done, they've stretched it, right, to incorporate businesses, teachers, political protesters, right? Think about the Cop City protesters in Atlanta who have been charged with RICO right now. They didn't know each other. They got to Georgia and presumably maybe they met, but maybe they didn't meet. Maybe they were actually just all in the same place at the same time. I don't know you. How does that mean that I'm a part of a criminal enterprise, right? But the state has used that fact pattern to prosecute people for RICO. Look at this article written by 3 attorneys in Georgia. In other words, a person does not need to have done anything wrong or illegal to be a part of a RICO conspiracy. All that is necessary is that their actions furthered the same overarching goal as those who actually committed the crime. Basically, you're swept up in something you didn't even know you were a part of, and now you're the subject of a RICO indictment facing very serious time behind bars. And to add insult to injury, the statute is complicated. It's spread, in Georgia at least, across 12 different code sections with nearly every word in the statute defined, because just because you think you know what an enterprise is, the law defines it as something different. And oftentimes an enterprise is whatever the prosecutors say an enterprise is. That's dangerous because that means the prosecutors in their discretion could choose to charge you when they really probably shouldn't. When you are not a part of an enterprise, if you are just a teacher, for instance, there's a famous case in Georgia where the current prosecutor, the current elected district attorney, Fani Willis, was actually the leader, and she spearheaded a RICO prosecution against teachers in Georgia. If you are confused and you thought that RICO was only for gangs, you're right, that's how it started. But now we see that RICO is being used across different arenas, far too many arenas, in my legal opinion. The original indictment against Young Thug, dropped in 2020, had 28 co-defendants, so listed a total of 28 people, 56 charges, and the indictment was almost 90 pages long. It was a total of 88 pages long, listing all the charges and all the allegations and all the things that Young Thug and the other individuals in this indictment have been charged with. Young Thug was arrested and he was held in custody until he took a plea deal, but we'll get to the plea deal later in the video. Although the indictment dropped in 2022, the allegations, the large allegation, the unaliving of Donovan Thomas, occurred in 2015. So the main crime occurred in 2015, the indictment happened in 2022, and in 2024, the case is still going on. So when people ask me to describe the Young Thug trial, I just imagine a circus, a rodeo, a clown show, because why are we still dealing with this in 2024? And little did we know that this case will go on to become the longest case in Georgia history. Okay, it took them almost a year just to pick a jury. They picked everybody from here to Kingdom Come, here to Timbuktu to be on this case, or at least they examined everybody that they could to be on this case, finally got jurors. And then after that, there were a whole other host of issues. There was one judge on the case, Judge Glanville, who got removed from the case because he Well, how do I say this nicely? He dug a hole for himself. Judge Glanville got into an argument with one of the attorneys, particularly Young Thug's attorney, Brian Steele, threatened to make Brian Steele go into custody. And Brian Steele is only one of the many attorneys who were threatened with custody in this case. 2 other attorneys were arrested, maybe even 3 other attorneys were arrested, but I know at a bare minimum, 2 other attorneys were arrested in connection with this case. Not particularly strong cases, I don't believe, but yes, 2 other attorneys were arrested nonetheless. So guys, safe to say, this case is insane. But the first judge did get removed from the case. Then the case went to a second judge who also removed herself from the case. The first judge was removed from the case by a different judge because he acted inappropriately and really shouldn't have been handling the case anymore. But the second judge was removed because she said that one of her deputies had an inappropriate relationship with one of the defendants in the case. And so she removed herself. So the case finally landed on a third judge, Judge Whitaker. And the prosecution was under fire throughout this entire time because a portion of their evidence consisted of rap lyrics and Instagram photos. I wish I was kidding. Using rap lyrics to say or claim that someone committed a crime is a slippery slope. It's very dangerous ground because rap lyrics are artistic expression. Just because you rap about something violent does not in fact mean that you committed that violent offense. We know that rappers are performers. They make up stories. They tell stories. It doesn't mean that they actually committed that offense. The same with Instagram photos. Just because you took an Instagram photo, for example, in a red shirt, does that mean that you are a part of a gang that's represented by a red shirt? Absolutely not. This evidence is extremely tenuous, it's attenuated, and it's alarming to use rap lyrics to try to convict someone of a crime where they could very much spend the rest of their life in prison. And it really was seen by a lot of people as an attack on hip hop culture as a whole and rap culture as a whole. For example, other states, California, I believe, has banned rap lyrics from being used in a criminal trial against you. And I do think Georgia should do the exact same thing. Now, you may be wondering, how did the state get any evidence at all? Or what was the evidence aside from the rap lyrics and the Instagram photos? And that really boils down to somebody named Kenneth Copeland, or as he went by, his street name is Lil Wody. Lil Wody was absolutely the star witness of this case, but not in a good way for the prosecution. Initially, when prosecutors were trying to get evidence of Young Thug or trying to gather up evidence about the gang, they've been talking to Lil Wody or Kenneth Copeland years prior to this indictment, and he would come in and he would get busted for little small stuff, maybe having a gun or drugs, whatever, and he would come into custody and prosecutors would question him because they wanted to investigate what they believe and claim is a gang, which is YSL. And when Woody got into custody, he started talking, chatting, saying whatever he needed to say in order to not go to jail, and the prosecutors took that evidence at face value. At some point, it was revealed that Kenneth Copeland even gave prosecutors fake names, made up people out of thin air. They didn't investigate, and they took those claims seriously. Kenneth Copeland got the best deal and really leveraged the system in his favor. He was originally accused of several crimes. He could have been indicted for these crimes later on, but he came in and he pled the fifth.
Some questions.
Okay.
How old are you?
Grown.
Okay, what does grown mean?
I'm an adult.
Okay. And when you say you're an adult, what number in years are you?
I plead the fifth.
So that was one of Kenneth Copeland's many viral moments. But at that point, he got immunity. What happens when you get immunity is that you are required to testify. So if the state gives you immunity and they say, we are going to require you to testify, and as a result of your testimony, we're not going to prosecute you for XYZ crimes. So you basically have a free pass, but we want you to come on the stand and testify for us. And that is what he did. And when he testified, he said, essentially, I lied. What was also revealed was that the prior district attorney, Paul Howard, was aware that Kenneth Copeland was not a reliable witness, and that is why he did not bring the case. The prior district attorney who lost election to Fonnie Willis knew about these weaknesses in the case, knew that Kenneth Copeland was unreliable, chose not to indict the case, but then a new prosecutor was elected and she indicted the case. And now we have the hot mess, the hot potato case going between judge to judge, and we are where we are today. And throughout the entire pendency of this trial, the defense attorneys were asking for mistrials left and right for very valid reasons. Prosecutors were putting into evidence things that the judge had previously said very clearly, you cannot place this into evidence. Witnesses were asking questions or answering questions in ways in which the court said, you cannot say that. That is excluded. Prosecutors were turning over discovery and evidence late. A whole host of reasons that the defense attorneys were asking for mistrials consistently. And finally, it reached a boiling point where the defense attorneys asked for a mistrial and the judge looked like she would grant a mistrial. In this case, Judge Whitaker in the YSL RICO trial said that she would not dismiss the case with prejudice, meaning she wasn't convinced that the prosecution goaded or led the defense attorneys and basically breadcrumbed them until they finally had to ask for a mistrial in order to get a second opportunity to try the case again. But when that pivotal moment happened, the defense attorneys and the prosecutors got to wheeling and dealing. Court stopped for days. People didn't know what was going on. And as it turns out, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys were having meetings talking about where to move forward in the case, talking about plea deals. Now, at one point, it was unclear whether Young Thug was going to take a plea deal. He was the defendant that had the most media attention in the case because it did look like his attorneys were headed for a not guilty. The trial was so confusing. It had gone on for so long. The case had gone between judge to judge. And the jurors were probably no doubt confused, as we all are confused about the straight line and the coherent story about the case going forward. So it was unclear whether Young Thug was going to accept a plea deal or not, but it turns out that he did in fact end up taking a plea deal, getting no jail time because he got credit for time served. He did take a plea deal. He was already in custody for about 2 years, so he will get the credit for that time served. But his plea deal was 15 years of probation with 20 years of prison time backloaded, meaning that if he successfully completes that probation, doesn't get in trouble while he's on probation, the 20 years will be eliminated and he will be off of probation. That is a long time to be on probation, but ultimately none of us are in his situation. And so we can't say what we would have or what he should have done in that scenario. Now, about 2 years later in 2024, remember this case was indicted in 2022. The last two people are now finishing their cases in part one of the indictment because the prosecution split this indictment into two parts. So this trial in which Young Thug was a part of is only part one. There's part two. So in part one, there are two more individuals left. They're concluding their cases. Their lawyers are doing closing statements on Monday. Today is November 22nd. So on Monday, November 25th, we should be hearing closing statements, and that will conclude part one of the YSL RICO trial, part two to begin at some point whenever the prosecution says it will begin. And I also would like to mention the effect that the RICO trial of Young Thug had on the larger criminal legal system in Georgia. You have to remember, Fulton County was certainly focused on this case. And because this case took up so many resources, a lot of other people were not able to have their cases heard. They couldn't get court dates because so much time and attention was being given to this YSL RICO trial. That means that if you were in custody for something, for example, you might not get a court date right away, or you might be waiting in custody for longer than you need to wait because there just aren't enough resources to get to your case as so much time and attention is being given to this massive monster of a RICO case. And that's ridiculous, especially in light of the fact that the Fulton County Jail has been found to be in violation of people's rights. Multiple people have died at the Fulton County Jail, and it's a health hazard to say the least. Feds are looking at the Fulton County Jail as we speak. Not to mention how expensive this trial was, taxpayer dollars, all for Young Thug, who prosecutors claim was the head honcho of this criminal street gang, just to be released on probation. As a matter of fact, when the prosecutor, Adrienne Love, gave her opening statement, she referred to Young Thug as King Slime. She said, "The evidence will show that the members of YSL knew who their leader was, and they knew the repercussions of not obeying him." And he's at home with his family right now. What was it really all for? All the while, these individuals are being held in custody. So all the while, Young Thug was being held in custody without bond while he was awaiting the case to conclude. Without being found guilty of anything, he was held in custody, claimed to be a danger to the community. When you look at his record, and he has no criminal record, right? The nature of the charges, the allegations, and it's frustrating because the state will charge RICO or they'll charge other offenses, knowing that these offenses sound dangerous, but also knowing that they don't have evidence to prove these allegations. Just the other day, the Judge Whitaker, dismissed at least 2 charges against one of the defendants because the state hadn't presented enough evidence to prove those allegations and yet kept that person in custody the entire time. This is a rigged game. I mean, at one point, the judge even said to the prosecution that they looked like they were putting the case together as they stumbled through it. They were putting it together day by day, piece by piece. And that lends credibility to the claim that the case never should have been prosecuted in the first place. These incidents happened over 10 years ago. If we're talking about almost 10 years ago, some of the things that we're talking about happened over 10 years ago. If we're starting from 2015, but I believe some of the allegations discussed in the trial might have even happened before then. And the charges weren't proved 5 years after, 6 years after, 7 years after, 8 years after, probably because the allegations never should have been brought to court in the first place, probably because you didn't have enough evidence to begin with. So in 2024, holding people's feet to the fire, again, is another one of the issues in this case and is another reason that this case has taken so long to conclude.